Hi everyone. So this room is full of fantastic leaders, but unfortunately for all of you, there is only one Gordon Bombay, and we can all aspire to be as good as he is. But I'm not up here to talk to you about this great movie. I'm here to talk to you about engineering leadership in 2024 and beyond. So I'm Scott Carey. As Mary said, I'm the editor-in-chief here at LeadDev. I've been covering the software industry for the best part of a decade as a reporter, and now in my role here, it's my job to understand what's going on in the industry and how it's impacting all of you. And at the start of this year, I really wanted to start to put some numbers behind what we were seeing and feeling and start to quantify the impact it was having on all of you. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit here this morning. But first, how did we get here? And really, back at the end of 2022, middle of 2022, we were coming out of the worst of the pandemic. We were promised the roaring 20s were coming back. It was going to be milk and honey. What did we get? We got this instead. We got a monumental vibe shift that we all had to live through. And for us specifically in engineering, what did this look like? It really looked like this graph. It was wave after wave of layoffs impacting the industry, peaking in Q1 2023. Loads of people were impacted. It shifted the ground under everyone's feet. We also saw the end of zero interest rates. So we saw the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. This all had a massive impact on the industry, how we do our jobs, what the priorities are. And we wanted to understand a little bit more about how that was actually filtering down to all of you. And then we had this as well on top of everything. We had this insane generative AI hype cycle. All of you were tasked with investigating how to use these new tools. Were they safe? How do I build into my products? You're getting pressure from the CEO down. You're getting pressure from your engineers up, saying we've got to start doing this stuff. So you're having to live through all of that, and it's just the biggest vibe shift we've all felt in a long time. So what did we want to find out? We really just wanted to know how all of this was impacting you and how much stress it was putting you under. We wanted to know how organizations were changing, what you were prioritizing, how you grow your careers in this very new environment. So what did we do? We did some research. Lena and I took this out in March and April. 1,100 of you responded. I hope some of you are in the room. If you are, thank you. And what we ended up with this really comprehensive piece of research looking into the state of engineering leadership now, but also what it's going to mean for the years to come. Now, Lena, I'm going to hand over, who's going to take you through the real detail of this research and to explain to you what you can take away from it for your careers. Thank you.
It was, to be precise, 1,107 responses, not just 1,100. I know Scott knew that number, he was just rounding. But those 7 responses were also important. We heard from engineers to CTOs, leaders at all levels and in various company sizes. We heard primarily from people managers at about 56% who responded to our survey. They're primarily from Europe, the UK, and the US. And we also analyzed 602 qualitative data points, so people who added notes, comments about things that changed for them. And yes, I read every single one of them. So if you wrote one of those, thank you. And I do want to say a big thank you to everyone who contributed to this, who dedicated their time and some energy to share with us how your role, how your work, how your organization has been changing. Big thank you. And I do want to say, because I believe in transparency, that one of the gaps in this data is that it's a very Western view on the tech industry. We all know that the tech industry in Asian countries, for example, is huge. There are a lot of emerging tech companies in African countries as well. That's currently not reflected here. That is a blind spot, and that is one that's really important to call out. So I want to talk to you about what all of this means for us. I'm a VP engineering. I've been in this industry for a really long time now. I also work as a mentor and coach to a lot of leaders. And I've always been really interested into what engineering leadership actually looks like. And a part of that is because I've always been a bit of an outlier in terms of my own role and background, because I didn't work as an engineer before becoming an engineering leader. And so we'll look at the data at first, the past and present, how have organizations changed and how have leadership roles changed as a result of that over the last couple of years. We'll go beyond the anecdotes and get quantitative. And then we'll look at what all of this means for us as leaders. Those are the 2 things I have for you today. Now, let's start with the past and present of engineering leadership. So how organizations have changed and what that means for all of us, also known as what we've all been feeling, chartified. we have 20 minutes to cover all of this, so buckle up, it's going to be a ride. And I want to begin with context, because after all, the environment is really impactful for how all of us as leaders are able to do our work, what our job is. And so let's start with the context. How have companies been changing in the last 2 years? Now, they tell you in presentation training not to put a lot of charts and numbers on a slide. I'm doing it anyway. This is me going against the system. So I want to briefly explain what you're seeing here. And you will be able to see all of these data points in detail later. So top to bottom, you can see company sizes. So at the top, very small companies, this is by number of engineers, 1 to 4. And then at the bottom, you have companies with more than 2,000 engineers, it's like larger corporations. On the left-hand side, you can see any decreases. So budget cuts and hiring freezes are things we asked about. On the right-hand side, it's hiring increases, budget increases. What I want to call out in terms of data points here is that especially larger companies cut budgets, laid off staff. Many smaller companies, though, were still growing. Not as strongly, but they were there. Increases were rarer overall and happened more commonly in smaller companies. And what we saw was basically beyond that was kind of substantially adding to that point, because the highest percentages of cuts, freezes, layoffs, leadership changes were in large companies, the companies that also dominated the headlines that Scott mentioned earlier. And that is the summary of what I just said. It's important to surprise yourself occasionally. What I also found interesting was that 7% of companies made layoffs and hiring increases. And of course, that makes sense. Like, we're talking tech industry, it's over the span of 2 years. Those kinds of changes tend to happen. But it's also important, and that was something we really looked out for, like, what are the impacts of those things? If a company is in 2 years doing layoffs and hiring increases again, that means a lot of change for the organization. And we also heard from 3% of leaders that said their companies did budget cuts and increases about the same time as well. Again, a lot of change. So the next big question for us, of course, was how have management levels changed? Especially middle management was rumored to basically have evaporated. And those are just the headlines that I was able to pull up from page 1 of the Google results. The idea that middle managers are basically just gone. And of course, that's an important question, because many of you are in middle management. Many of you report to middle managers, or you want to move into that level one day, even though we also know it's a really tricky level to be in. And so we wanted to hear what that actually looked like. So first of all, we asked, how did management roles change in your company? And the answer was 62% of respondents said they didn't really change. Now, you may have done the math here and say, hey, Lena, what about the 38% that aren't here? That is a good question. So we saw 18% of respondents said to us management levels increased in their company, 20% decreased. So you could technically again say, hey, that data kind of almost evens out, right? It's like 18, 22% delta. Well, again, it's important to keep that in mind. That is a lot of people for whom their career changed. They took on new jobs, they were laid off, or they went into a different company. We looked also at how is this different across different countries or regions or different company sizes. We didn't see huge differences there, but we saw some of those in the follow-up question we asked. Because those 38% who said management levels did change, we asked them what levels were impacted when those changes happened. We asked about, and you see that hierarchically sorted, so upper management is at the top, middle management in the middle, and then line management, the second graph from the bottom. You also have other down there. And to me, this was really interesting because it put a number behind the question how middle management has shifted in particular. Line managers, you can see, technically evens out. Upper management, slight increase, also interesting. And middle management has the biggest delta at about minus 22% between increases and decreases. That also means middle management isn't gone. We also saw that when we asked people about who they're reporting to, there are still middle managers in companies, especially companies that are hiring, that are growing, that need more people to help them handle complexity. Those companies are also bringing in middle managers. But especially the larger companies, again, the ones that we saw in the headlines, those are the ones that had decreases predominantly. So all of that, of course, also had to mean that the ways that companies work has shifted. I want to ask all of you, raise your hand, who of you has gone through a reorg in the last 2 years? For anyone who doesn't have my angle here, that is about 70% of the room. If you went through a reorg, please take your hand up again. And then I want you to just keep it up if you enjoyed that reorg. I think maybe 15 people. I'm glad you're keeping it positive. I do have, for the ones who kept their hand up, I also seriously kudos. I don't want to be sarcastic about this. I do have a T-shirt prepared for you. Everyone else who lowered their hand again, you don't get one. Sorry. And everyone who kept their hands up, you're in good company, or you actually at least are in company, because 66% of the respondents who we heard from said their companies did a reorg in the last 2 years. It's not surprising. I think it's kind of legendary that tech companies and engineering departments have a bit of a tendency towards a good reorg. I also do think the reorgs can be genuinely helpful, but 66% of companies did one. 48%, so basically half of companies, reported leadership changes. I must say, though, some of the respondents to our survey didn't think those changes were drastic enough. Like this engineer who said they're really excited about AI for the C-suite. Let's replace them with an LLM. Those can explain their decisions. On the note of executive decisions, 54%, so half of companies reported 4 or more large changes in the last 2 years. 18%, like every fifth company, said they made 6 or more changes of a large magnitude in that time. And that's the magnitude of strategy changes, reorgs, layoffs, budget cuts, budget increases, and others. Meanwhile, some things, though, didn't change a lot. We also wanted to know what our business is prioritizing now. So the question we raised was, what type of work are you and your teams prioritizing in the next 12 months? That's we're getting into the outlook. The answer is everything and also AI. The options that we gave, and you can see those in the categories here, are product and services offering and feature development at 77% was by far the strongest, not very surprising. Internal enablement and productivity is the second category, which was really decent, honestly. Customer experience, and then the last one, AI and data. This result honestly made sense. I am available in the office hour later to explain the definition of priority, but that's a different thing. This result made sense, and I do want to give a shout out to one brutally honest answer, an engineer that said, in response to what are you and your team prioritizing, sheer stupidity. That is not one of the options that we gave, just to be clear. So all of these changes, of course, needed to be handled by someone. I don't know if you can think of who that might have been. I have a suggestion. Well, we asked all of you. How have your role and responsibilities changed over the past 12 months? And this answer, in this case from an advanced engineer, was quite representative, who said they're filling in for more positions at once. 71% of engineering leaders at all levels report an increase in scope. Greater area of responsibility, more direct reports, more teams. 41% of managers have more direct reports. Unfortunately, some leaders were also laid off, in this case, a manager of managers, but we heard from a lot of other people, and I'm really grateful that you too shared your experiences with us. Some shifts are really exciting and to be expected. Those are also still happening, and I do want to emphasize that because it's not all just doom. Like this tech lead who reported, I have a slightly wider scope, but it's because I'm pushing for a staff engineering role. It's a relatively common thing. Also, good luck to them, rooting for you. And of course, the way you spend your time is the kind of leader you are. So we also asked, how do leaders actually spend their time now compared to 12 months ago? This is the result that we heard. I'm not going to go into the details. I just want you to look at the picture. Because despite all these shifts in roles, like the broader scope, more responsibilities, leaders actually told us that their time spent didn't really change much. But you may have caught the qualifier in the headline here. It didn't change much in aggregate. Because when I looked at the data in more detail, and yes, I looked again at every single data point, this is the report from the 411 engineering managers that we heard from. At the bottom, you can see the things they did last year or 12 months ago. Above the black bar in the middle is how they're spending their time now. In the middle, there are a couple of folks who reported no time change. And of course, It's data. There are outliers, all of that. This is the very raw data. In the middle, there are people for whom things didn't change much. But then on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side, that's, again, every single chart, every single bar is one person whose day really changed. And for some people, it changed quite a lot. The picture looked really similar for managers, by the way, and all of that had consequences. 35% of leaders report that they're working more hours compared to last year, and especially people managers at all levels. This is where the impact of the scope increase goes. One of the biggest surprises that I honestly really hadn't expected was the whole question of more hands-on technical work. I've been hearing it, I feel like everyone's been talking about it, but we didn't see it in the data. Actually, even more so, there was basically no change in what line managers, managers, or even C-level folks reported in terms of how they're spending their time. I'm still curious as to why that is. I have some hypotheses that I'm not going to get into, but feel free to ask me later. We had expected to see so much more of this because the rumor has been so strong. And yes, for some people, it's become a bigger part of their work. I don't want to downplay that, but really not everyone. Believe me, I slice this data in many different ways. Now, a lot of this, what I've shared so far, probably wasn't news for you because you've lived it. But this is the data to show you're not the only one. And this is beyond rumors. This is beyond just individuals complaining or raising concerns with their bosses. This is real. You can get the full report that I've just given you 2 highlights of under this thing. Based on the data that we saw, I just want to recap real quick. Organizations have decreased in budgets and size, but some have grown. Management layers have shifted, especially in larger organizations. How leaders spend their time has changed for many individuals. You can get all of this and much more data here, and we also have a whole section with recommendations for what this means for you as leaders and what you can do to work with in this new state. I'll just pause here to open this can, which has I have no idea how this works. Is anyone here into technology and can help me figure this out? I've actually done it. I'm very proud of myself. This is my real accomplishment for today. That also meant you all had a chance to scan the QR code. You can also still find the link for the report at the top, at the bottom left of the slides that we have going forward. I did promise that the data would just be one part of what I'm telling you about. And now that I have a voice again after getting some water, I'm here to keep going. I titled this talk, How to Skate Where the Puck is Going When the Ice is Melting. Now, we will talk about sports metaphors and also the future of engineering leadership. So again, buckle up. This quote, I skate to where the puck is going, not where it has been. I don't know who's been familiar with this already. I honestly had to look it up. It's by Wayne Gretzky, a former professional ice hockey player. That's how you know I'm not into ice hockey. And the idea of it really is that a puck, like think of this thing here as the puck, the only way that you can intercept it is by going where it will be, for example, over here, so that by the time you arrive, you and the puck arrive at the same time. Not by going where the puck is right now, because then it's already gone. And it's something that, honestly, in my 20-year career, especially in startups and scale-ups, I've heard a lot, and I'm afraid to admit that I've also probably said it once or twice. And I have a disclaimer, because, as I mentioned, I'm not an ice hockey person. These are the kinds of skates that I know how to use. They're speed skates, for anyone who's not familiar. I'm not an ice hockey person. But I do know a thing or two about business cliches. I worked in finance before working in tech, so I think I've soaked up a lot of that. The ice has been melting. I'm using that as a metaphor for the changes in the tech industry that we've just seen in data. But I also do want to call out that it's also a nod to climate change, and that nod is very intentional. I know you're not supposed to explain jokes. That's another thing they tell you in presentation training, but this isn't really one, so I wanted to make this explicit. You can't really skate on water the way you can on ice. Especially at some point, you probably have to swim. And all of these changes in conditions have shifted what organizations expect from leaders. And we're coming out of years of this desire for hockey stick growth, especially startups and scale-ups chasing after this idea that after a longer period of basically very, very slow growth, at some point, there's this inflection point where things really go up, hockey stick style. But maybe it's time we start putting the hockey sticks away. Because all of those things have really impacted leaders. We have a word in German, and I promise you it's not an insult, even though it may look like one. The German word is eierlegende Wollmilchsau. I'm happy to assist later in learning to pronounce it in German. just again, approach me. The literal translation is it's an egg-laying wool-milk pig. I swear I'm not making this up. It's an idiom, we usually use it as a joke, and it describes the ideal of this imaginary hybrid livestock that combines all the advantages of different types of animals. And we use it to describe a person, a thing, or a solution to a problem. And this person, thing, solution seems to only have advantages, satisfy all needs and requirements, and exactly that is why it's not real. But we pretend it's real. Leaders, both technical and people leads, continue to be the glue and gaffer that holds organizations together and that adjusts as businesses need to change. We've seen that in how these roles have shifted for a lot of people over the last years. This need isn't going anywhere. And many leaders now work in really challenging setups. I hear that from so many of the leaders that I speak with every week. They often are now in roles of really broad scope and context. And those tend to be roles that are kind of a mix of that everything, the idea of being that egg-laying wool-milk pig. People management, mentoring, development, technical leadership, including strategy and decisions, delivery management with some components of product and project management, and also hands-on coding, ideally 50% of your time. Many leaders work in broader, even unclearer than before roles now, with high expectations and report to, well, not a middle manager anymore potentially, but to hyper-busy managers without much training or support, because those issues, they trickle all the way down through the organization. They're not just at line manager level, they're everywhere. We really need to think why we do this work. I know so many people, especially people who value the things that LeadDev, I think, stands for, who care about the people they work with and want them to succeed. So many of you have had to rethink why we do this work, what it means to be successful, or at least not get fired, and what impact you want to have. You may have gotten into this work for the people, but all over the last years, it's been spreadsheets all the way down. And it showed. This person wrote to us, and I wanted to really have this quote on here for a little while, who said, in terms of being asked about tech industry trends they're concerned about, a reduced focus on diversity and culture now that, quote unquote, times are tough. We've always known that the talk of we're a family has been not real, but the degree to which companies are invested in their staff, or at least afford their staff a basic level of respect, that has technically never been tied to budgets, but smaller budgets and tighter markets have brought to light what many companies are really about. When suddenly talent scarcity isn't as big an issue anymore in many places, all of a sudden the people development budgets, the career growth, the feedback conversations aren't really a big priority anymore, no matter what the company values say. Business has a long, long history of sports metaphors. I promised we would get into that. But unlike many others, like keep your eyes on the ball or they dropped the ball, this one is from ice hockey, not from baseball or football. But it was said by Wayne Gretzky. Here's just a small sample of other people who said this. Steve Jobs on leading at Apple. I also do want to mention I'm not comparing myself to these people, even though I've been using this quote a lot, and even though I'm wearing a turtleneck today. Warren Buffett on stock market pessimists. John Roth, the former CEO of Nortel. Norman Augustine, Norman Augustine, who was the chairman and CEO of defense company Lockheed Martin. This industry, and this quote is just a way to show it. I'm sure there are so many other people who've used it, and again, I may have too. I'm also guilty of this, but this industry continues to follow hypes, trends, and patterns and go into extremes. The herd mentality is really strong. Everyone is trying to skate where the puck is going. When they make their move, they usually move in packs. The idea of the Gretzky quote was to get ahead of the competition and really understand the game that's being played. But the reality is that everyone is going after the same thing, hoping that they'll be the first one there. One current example is One current example is, and I kid you not, I've actually seen this, and it sounds like some of you may have too. A lot of companies' product roadmaps currently say something with AI, and often literally. And I get it. Like, I've been there. It's the next big thing, says your boss, and TechCrunch. You hear it's where all VC is going now. Your customers are asking for it, or they will ask for it any day now, and your investors. Your competition's probably already on it. Your employees are asking about it. You will need to have it if you want to raise more money. Every conference has sessions about it, and yes, I'm very aware that the things that I'm saying here and the things that we're writing about in this report are part of this dynamic too, and it's something I think about a lot and have been trying to work out how to fix, but it is a thing. And while you spend time thinking about this, your competitor just posted on LinkedIn that they're working on it, and oh no, what is the sound? It is Slack. It's your boss asking when the release will be. I spoke to a VP engineering last week who was thinking about a new organization structure after layoffs that his company did. I think it was 5 rounds of layoffs. They're thinking about what engineering manager roles should look like in their org in the future. And this VP said to me, maybe I should ask the engineering managers on my team to work more hands-on again. I'm hearing that everyone is doing it. You saw the data earlier. I know some people are doing it probably more than we have data for, but not everyone is doing it. I know that so many of you are concerned about this herd mentality. We have heard from so many people in this survey, but also otherwise, people who are concerned about the environmental impact of cloud computing, about how AI is sold as something much more than it is, and the impact of biases in data and AI, and all these hypes, or even things like this. A quote from a manager of engineers who said, they're concerned about organizations prioritizing shortcuts as quick win revenue generation, Boeing on a smaller scale. That is terrible. We've been moving fast and breaking things too long, and it shows. The tech industry has a really long history of terrible impact on humanity at large, from poor user representation. Shout out to Apple Health for releasing without period tracking for a really long time. Cambridge Analytica for misusing personal data from Facebook users, racist face recognition that only recognizes faces of white people. There's also other conversation about what happens with all that facial recognition data. Platforms that have contributed to exploitation of users, to make literal genocides to data centers that alone consume the equivalent of a top 10 energy-consuming country globally. Working on software in the year 2024 is more than making some designs or typing code in an editor. I think we all know this, but we are enablers. Enablers for empowerment of people and enablers for harassment and abuse. We're not neutral, our code is not neutral, and our technology is not neutral, and neither is our leadership. Our work touches on the fundamentals of people's identities and their lives. I know that lately, many of us, and I honestly am one of them, many of us have been feeling much more reactive and powerless to all these larger changes around us. And I understand, I want to acknowledge that that's very real. It's been difficult for many people. There's been a lot of changes, and after all, we also have bills to pay and need to survive in capitalism, even though the tech industry is a big part of that. But at the same time, many of us are still in positions of power, and I want to remind us of that. Software development is an active representation of our users, their needs, but also of what we even consider a problem worth solving. As leaders, we shape what that representation looks like. And yes, it's understandable to have felt powerless among all these changes, but I also know both of those things are true. And that's why amid all of those big shifts and seismic changes in the industry, I want to remind me and us and you, the tech industry isn't just some external force of nature. Every one of us is part of this industry. Everyone here is the tech industry, whether we like it or not. Every one of us shapes what good engineering looks like every single day through how you give and receive feedback, through how you communicate, how you run your meetings, how and what you decide, who you delegate important projects to, whose work you praise, who you hire and promote, through how you handle employee concerns and safety issues, how you handle unionizations, what user data you collect and how you use it, through how much you race after the next hype, or at least try to understand what user problems you're trying to solve with something with AI, what ethical considerations you make or ignore in your decisions, and where you intervene and decide to look the other way. Our industry's been changing, but my, your, and our decisions every day are part of shaping that change. And now, more than in a really long time, I think it is a time for us to get clear with ourselves on what kind of leaders we want to be. Because when everyone is racing after the puck, where will you skate? Thank you.